Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Continuous Discussions, the online panel where we talk about Agile, DevOps, and continuous delivery. I'm Sam Fell.
And I'm Anders Wallgren. And today's topic is pipeline analytics and insights. We have a long intro here, so I'm going to read from it. Data is everywhere in DevOps. We use it to optimize our processes, manage our apps and environments, guide our DevOps journeys, align our culture, track the business impact, and more. Your delivery pipeline itself generates a lot of data and should also be driven by it. The pipeline encompasses a myriad of point tools, processes, environments, teams, and stakeholders, all with varied requirements. So, what key metrics should you measure throughout the pipeline? What are the prerequisites to enabling effective data collection and analytics? How to transform pipeline data into actionable insights? And also, what does the ideal dashboard look like for dev, for ops, and for the business?
Fantastic. And we have a wonderful panel joining us for this episode, starting with a repeat offender, Juni Mukherjee. Welcome, Juni.
Thank you.
All right. And Matt, yeah, you want to introduce yourself a little bit more? I know you're recurring, but let's introduce yourself so that folks who don't know you get to know you.
Okay, I thought repeat means shut up, like you.
No, never.
No, I'm kidding. So my name is Juni, and I wrote a couple of books. The first one was What We Should Not Do in a Continuous Delivery Pipeline, and the second one was more focused on what we should do. It's more on the design side. I've been on some conferences, some panels, some, the thought leadership side. And I've had an absolutely wonderful time with Sam and Anders previously on C99, and I'm very happy to be back. And I will learn a lot from you folks, like the panelists, and of course, like Sam and Anders.
Yeah, hopefully you won't learn anything from me. So thank you, Juni. And so since you're all repeat offenders, I won't say that for each of you, but I will ask you to introduce yourself. Manuel, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back. It's a pleasure. So I'm a DevOps and continuous delivery consultant. So helping all kinds of clients adopt these practices and changing their culture and so on. So I like to focus first on how the teams are working and what's the flow of work. So obviously all the pipeline analytics and metrics come along with that. So I'm really looking forward to this panel.
Wonderful. We're happy to have you back. Mirco, good evening.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
5 a.m. here in Australia. So I'm looking after the Agile and DevOps practice for Accenture here in Asia Pacific, and also soon to be published author. So I'm similar to Juni. I wrote a little bit about continuous delivery in there as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I've been seeing the push on social media. We're very excited for that as well. Paula Thrasher, welcome back.
Hey, thanks. So I'm Paula Thrasher. Hopefully my mute button's off. I work for CSRA, and we work for the federal government, and I've got teams that work across a whole bunch of different agencies, running different pipelines, different technology stacks, different goals and objectives. So hopefully can share sort of the compares and contrasts that have come out of the different communities in the federal government.
Lovely. We're happy to have you. And last but not least, Torsten Volk.
I'm Torsten Volk with Enterprise Management Associates. We are Boulder, Colorado-based analyst firm. My practice covers basically all of the foundation for DevOps, all of the systems and the underlying automation, and currently containers and machine learning and AI are my big topics, because those are all areas that you can improve the DevOps process and improve those metrics that we're going to talk about.
Absolutely. All right, fantastic. So let's get in it. If there are folks out there who are interested in joining the conversation, you can use the hashtag C9D9 on social media and ask questions. But right now, let's get to the questions for the panelists. So when we talk about what we want to measure in these pipelines, this is a funny little graphic. The only valid measurement of code quality, right, is in there's the good code, and then that's not good code. Too many WTFs per minute, which is pretty funny. But what kind of stuff do you actually want to measure in a pipeline. And let's start with Paula. Paula,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
So I actually usually when I'm talking to teams about what to measure, I have some standard sets, but I'd like to hear from the team about what problem they're trying to solve for before you start jumping in with you got to measure all these things. Because you can go absolutely bonkers with numbers and you just create chaos. You don't actually solve for things. So, so for example, there was a customer I had some years ago where release quality was an issue. And so actually, this is kind of a funny story to me. So they had this metric, which was how many releases had defects after deployment. Pretty common, measure of putting something into production that had an issue. And they incentivized the contractor so that if you put something into production that had a defect, you didn't get paid.
Okay.
What I found out was that 5 out of every 6 releases was rolled back before it went live. Okay. Because they would run them in production and find errors, and they didn't want to risk getting dinged for putting an error into production. So even if it was questionable, they rolled it back because there was absolutely no penalty for rolling it back. So instead of actually fixing the quality issues that were causing them to put errors in production, where you've got a bunch of people and it's 11 p.m. on Thursday night and we're all up late and we're trying to figure out if it's working or not. Instead of actually fixing the issue that got us there, they just rolled back and ignored it. And for years, that was the culture of the organization, was to roll back releases. They were completely comfortable with this release rollback ratio being horrible. But God forbid you put an error in production. That was death.
Because rollbacks, that's never problematic. Rolling back, you can never introduce rolling back.
Flawlessly all the time. Right. What was funny was you introduced an error due to rollback, that didn't count. So, all about gaming your SLAs. So we had just recently taken over this contract, and so I thought we got to fix.
Oh my gosh.
So we started inching that backwards. How many errors made it to staging? How many errors made it to testing? How much test coverage do you have? And how many releases did you roll back? Just measuring teams on how many, because that was actually the thing. I discovered anecdotally that it was like 5 out of 6, but I had no hard data that it was 5 out of 6 because it wasn't even being measured. Right? It wasn't even a problem. It was so culturally accepted as normal that it wasn't a problem. So I think if you're thinking about kind of how to introduce it, sometimes just the choice to measure something means that people are aware of this problem. Just the mere act of measuring it, just the mere act of measuring release rollback. Suddenly people paused for a second and thought maybe we shouldn't roll this back. Maybe we should not go to release, maybe we should fix these problems earlier. So I think that's something that regardless of where you go in your pipeline, where you're going to measure different aspects of it, think about what you're trying to accomplish so that you put the spotlight on the parts that you want to fix, whether that be the requirements coming in before you even touch the pipeline, something about build, something about test, scaling, performance. There's a lot of different places to measure, but that's kind of my first tip.
Yeah, and that's great. The whole idea of that gaming, I know Anders has a couple of pretty good examples of that as well.
I mean, I think that you got to be outcome based, and then you got to assume that people will be rational, which is to say they will try to game the system if that's what they need to do in order to meet those those target numbers. Right.
There's an old practice from, we borrow so much from lean manufacturing. So there was a whole buzz in lean manufacturing in the late 90s about balanced scorecard, right? This was, I actually don't know who to attribute it to, but it was about having balanced measures. It was more business oriented, but it's the same game, right?
Right.
The part of the fix to this was measuring both releases with issues and release rollbacks and defects. And so you couldn't game it. Yeah. Right? I'm trying to get total quality. I'm not trying to just keep this one number happy.
I think
that's, if you think about a balance, start thinking about how you'd game it and what you need to counterbalance this metric, because you might create incentives for people, to do the other.
It also helps to think about, so we're measuring. So if one of the things that's part of that component is, okay, defects that escape into production, you also have to have the kind of the follow up to, okay, once we have one in production, we got to root cause that, kind of all the way back to the left, and figure out what to measure back there so that it doesn't happen. If
Exactly.
That's right. So really, one measurement can beget a better one, or at least an earlier one.
Right.
And earlier is usually better for defect kind of stuff. So
yeah,
the root cause part is pretty important, because otherwise you're just playing whack-a-mole at the release side. And
right. Well, I think that's the problem of starting at the end, right? Measuring the release quality at the very end, how to go out the door. Okay, that's great, but that doesn't actually shape behavior of the issues that we're causing, the release issue. So I think
that's
that's
the symptoms.
Right. You're just being alerted to the non-tasty cake, not the fact exactly what ingredient you threw in there. It's like, that's not sugar, that's salt. Okay. Manuel, let's switch over to you. What are your thoughts on things to pay attention to and focus on in that pipeline?
I think one aspect is you can have different levels of who is looking at metrics. So I totally agree with Paula on inside a team, you want to care about what are the problems they're facing, the difficulties. For example, we did an assessment with a team trying to see what were the practices they had and how they could improve. And we tried to understand what was holding them down. And someone said, well, I often have to stay extra hours at work because I get a support request, 5 minutes before I have to leave. And that's obviously painful. So we said, okay, let's measure that. It doesn't have to be always system-related metrics or tool-related metrics. Like, okay, you can count how many days in a month you had to stay longer. And if we're trying to improve that and reduce that occurrence, then we can track that over time. Obviously, it's a manual process, but why not? I mean, it's valid. And then the other level I like to think about is kind of metrics helping to bring people together into look at the problems. So this might be at the department level or engineering level, but making it very visible to everyone. And like Paula was saying, you can't focus only in a single metric, because you might be then going into local optimization. Like we're improving cycle time, we're delivering faster and faster, but obviously you might, if you're not being careful, you might be going up with your defect rate. So there are a few metrics I kind of recommend, like flow efficiency, which how much percentage of the time that it takes to deliver change is actual active work versus idle time, waiting time. So that relates strongly to, obviously, to your process. If there's a lot of bureaucracy, if there's maybe some lack of ownership in some teams for the changes. And then you can have cycle time, obviously, to look at the flow and how long it takes to get stuff delivered. And it's also strongly related to your continuous delivery practices. Are you, as fast as you could be? Throughput, to know how much can we deliver over a certain period of time, that help us then predict how long things are going to take. So it's important for business and planning. Something like mean time to repair, understanding what's our capacity to respond to issues. And that's also kind of a proxy for how much technical depth we have in the code. Not always, but it's strongly related to how much difficult it is to fix problems and change our code to be more resilient. Or do we need more automation or to be able to respond faster, or do we have often configuration problems? So all of that is kind of strongly related to mean time to repair, and then defect rate, or something that is significant in terms of the quality of the software. Like I said, so if you have a group of
we're losing you.
Metrics that relate to different areas you care about, and you keep an eye out, you keep tabs on what the other metrics are saying, and make sure you're not optimizing locally for one thing and the other things are going a bit wrong, or are going worse than before.
Looking at the wait states, or kind of the efficiency, I think is really interesting. We have a customer in Northern Ireland who I was there visiting late last year, and they had this whiteboard where they had just done the kind of the results of a value stream mapping for one of their products, and there were bright orange sticky notes in between all the kind of work stages that denoted the wait time in between. And when they added everything up, they had about 3 weeks worth of actual time on task and 4 months of wait states, right? So now,
exactly.
Now they know what to do in their cycle
time. I tend to recommend is often we have bottlenecks in the value stream for all sorts of reasons. So what I actually recommend is besides those core metrics that give you a kind of overview of the state of your delivery of your software operations, also then look at the value stream, look at those bottlenecks you were saying, and come up then with a metric which is a kind of proxy to evaluate: are we getting better? Are we reducing that bottleneck? Are we working to remove it? So that's more specific. It can be how long does it take from a request for new infrastructure until it's actually provisioned and validated, if that's your bottleneck. And we've had clients where that's a big bottleneck, which is an order of magnitude higher than how fast is your build or your tests, because it takes days or weeks to get a new server. So it depends then specifically on the organization, what they're doing and what are the bottlenecks. But you can come up with metrics that just help you guide. Are we improving in removing this bottleneck?
And leading it out, exactly. All right, excellent. Mirco, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so I have perhaps a slightly different perspective. So I wouldn't say that it's one metric or the other. Like we changed many of our engagements now to create a dashboard that collects all the data from the pipeline and all the supporting systems. And what we find very interesting is a correlation. So I give you 2 examples. One is, everyone is talking about automated tests and code coverage. Well, let's look at that. As this increases, what happens to our defects that we find in integration testing or in production? So we can actually see at what percentage, when it increases, it doesn't actually make an impact anymore, so that you get to being able to make better economic decisions.
Right.
The other one that we've used is we aggregated a number of factors into a release readiness score. So these might be recent, what's the frequency of defects over the last 3 weeks? How many build failures? How many deployment failures? How much of the scope has changed? When you look at Jira, how many actual text changes in the description did we have? And that's obviously something that evolves over time. But we compare that, we track that against what happens after go live. So if you are going live with a score of 80, does that mean we have a higher impact on production in regards to maintenance, availability or defects? Mm-hmm. And then you can, over time, tune this so that you're in your cab, you basically look at a release readiness score, and you have at least more scientific way of determining this than the usual PowerPoint deck that you look at.
Right. Now, you talk about a release readiness. Do you talk about a release impact or release value as well? Are you following that back up with, here's what that release it changed with my conversion rate, or it reduced churn, or it blew up all my customers and now they're all gone, right? All that stuff matters also.
Yeah, so that would be, we have that on the status tracking side. We don't have that yet on the release impact.
On the pipeline side.
So we see for, I don't know, release 3, that this has a $3 million value on it, and that's this release. But we don't have then, if the impact is 80%, was that X dollars? So we haven't got a monetary value for that yet.
Right.
Yeah. We use that.
Really good idea.
We used that score on my my program some years ago, and if you're working towards continuous delivery, I love the ability to use it as a maturity model. So I had 28 programs projects, different separate applications that we were tracking across 4 portfolios. So we gave everybody a score based on a lot of those things you're talking about. Some of it would come out of the pipeline, and some of it would come out of, the quality assurance team, how well you filling out your paper and that kind of stuff, as well as the actual technical testing and that kind of piece. And what was nice about it was, if you got a high enough score, we had this in our tool chain that there was an approval flow. Your release would, go to there was sort of a release readiness owner. That person would look at your score, look at your test logs, and if it looks good, click OK, and you are auto-scheduled to release, and it went on its scheduled time without any human intervention because it was, auto-pathed without having to have a change control board. It was like a standard change, basically.
Right.
And if you weren't at a certain score threshold, you had to go through the standard governance, go to the cab, and what I didn't expect out of that was what an incentive it became. It incentivized programs to adopt practices that were better because they wanted to go the fast track. They didn't want to go to the
skip across the top of the line.
As using your tool chain, using that scoring as a little gamification is actually a really good way to incentivize teams to adopt strategies. And if you've got a large portfolio where not everybody's, at nirvana, some people are working their way up.
Some people have some legacy stuff. It sort of it happens. All right, fantastic.
I had 5 mainframes. But no, actually, one of my mainframe teams achieved the auto deployment gold star. They adopted automated testing on a mainframe. So if they can do it, you can too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I had one last thought, and so the way that we do a lot of this is we have actually all the data in our dashboard, but then because you have dashboards, you basically have an executive view where you put the metrics that currently matter, right? So you have the whole catalog, so you're not losing any of the stuff, but on a day-to-day basis, you're looking at different things. To the points that both Paula and Manuel made, things change, right? And you're looking at what is the current bottleneck, but that previous bottleneck might well become the bottleneck again in a month's time, right? So for us, it was just a matter of then updating that first executive view to whatever we needed.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Like everything else, the metrics that you're going to focus on you're going to have to iterate on it over time. And whatever your biggest bottleneck is, if you make it smaller, there's going to be some bigger. But then when you make those smaller, then that one will become big again. So,
and I think there's also, there's also different kind of types of metrics when it comes to that, right? There's sort of like regression metrics. Like I fixed that issue. I want to make sure it never occurs again. Let's find a metric to make sure that we catch that, right? So that, the fire alarm goes off if we ever make that mistake again. Almost, like a regression test, right? I fixed a bug, add a test to the suite, right? We need some sort of, way to catch that. Because there's different kinds of metrics in terms of how quickly you need to respond to them.
Sure.
Like if you're flying in an airplane and all of a sudden the engines go out.
That's important.
That's important. You got to think fast. You've got a tech list, all of that stuff. But you've got a lot of other metrics that you're using too, like your fuel level and, all of that kind of stuff. So it's all, there are different timelines and different ways that you react to things. And some of the reactions are very short term, outage, fix it, blah, blah, blah. And some are kind of more long term, like over time, we want to get the defect rate in production down and those kinds of things. And you need both. You need a kind of a mixture of both.
And I think it's important that you have that easily available, right? So I think the biggest frustration for me was before we started this, that you had to go into Jira to get this view, and into Jenkins to get this view, and into Bamboo to get this view, and into SonarQube to get this view. And at that point, correlation becomes impossible, right? Because you have to keep all that stuff in your head and like.
Because one of those things all relates to release X versus X prime or Y, right? It's all going to be different. So having to go back and spreadsheet all that and PowerPoint it up is, there's a lot of latency and there's a error prone because today you get the data from Betty and tomorrow you get the data from Bob from the same team, and they're going to look at the data a little bit differently and they're going to add their own spin, and spin is not good, right? Even if the metrics that you're collecting are not entirely perfect, as long as they're collected consistently, you can act on that, right? So this is a great conversation. I want to try and get to, we have 2 more folks that need to chime in. So Juni, let's find out your thoughts. I know you think a lot about this, so tell us your thoughts on what to measure in the pipeline.
Sure. First of all, congratulations to you folks for double award winners. You look really great, together on this screen. Going back to metrics, I do echo all of your thoughts, like as Paula, Manuel, Mirco. I like to break it up, like first throughput. it is why we are in business, or maybe we will run out of business if we cannot measure this successfully. So check-in to go live is how long does it take for a check-in to go live in the hands of a customer, and that is pretty much the basis of everything. And check-in to go live is a subset of feature lead time, which is how long does it take to get a feature out. And then feature lead time is a subset of concept to cash, which means how long does it take for a concept to actually make money. But again, like going back, at the heart of it is really check-in to go live, which is measurable by the pipeline. And this is something pretty close to my heart. This is probably, the basis foundation of everything. However, speed is not traded off with quality. So I would like to put it on the same canvas saying, here's check-in to go live, hopefully going up. But at the same time, number of production issues is also not hopefully going up. Means we didn't introduce risk by increasing speed. So we kind of have it on the same canvas. We really hope it shows the right trend. And then, of course, throughput is also being a developer advocate at Atlassian, this is key for us to define milestones. So we have test, staging, and production as the milestones for pipelines, and pretty much the release cadence. And you could have a different milestone, and that's fine. But the principle is you measure different things in each of these milestones, and you create gates, which are kind of the substitute for humans, otherwise giving approval. The gates can automatically decide whether you should go ahead, whether the versioned artifact is going to get promoted to the next level or not. And at this time, throughput can also be represented by the number of deployments in test, staging, and production, which is if in the last 3 months, you've had 80% of deployments in test and 10% in staging and 10% in production of all the 100% of your deployments, it's probably telling you a story. Maybe, and it's not a blame game kind of thing, but you still have to go back and figure out, why it's kind of
delta. Why is there a difference, right?
Why there's a drag, and you're using the word flow, and the drag is actually very related to flow. So if it's dragging, there's what is dragging you. Maybe it may be environment, for all we know. I mean, maybe not the product. Product may be like super cool for all we know. So, but then it forces you to go and make a investigation. Mm-hmm. The other thing super close to my heart, and I keep bringing it up everywhere I go this time, is an index, because it prevents you from being gamed. So code quality index and stability index are the two indices that I use. A code quality index in test, and stability index in production. Both are indices. Very hard to game. So code quality index is like maybe cyclomatic complexity plus code duplication plus code coverage. So if you think code coverage we can game anytime, right? Like it's the easiest thing to game. But if you complement it with cyclomatic complexity and code duplication and anything else that you folks have in mind, I'm pretty sure you're very experienced people, then it becomes a triangle, and the center of gravity is in the middle. It's not in any of the vertices. So if I am pulling one vertex pretty heavily, either due to technical reasons or political reasons, I'm pretty sure you all have gone through this. You still have the center of gravity in the middle, which kind of forces the ship to not turn too much in one direction. And then you have in production, you have stability index. Fun part was I asked developers, what do you mean by stability? They said speed, like check-in to go live kind of stuff. I asked business, what do you mean by stability? They said repeat customers. That's it. Like, it's finally at the end of the day, money talks. Yeah. And I asked operations, what do you mean by stability? They said number of escape defects means, or the lack of it rather, like defects that escape the pipeline. And, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. I said, you're all right. But at the same time, all of you need to factor into one gate or one index, as I say. And this in production, you can always tell that all three parties have to be happy. It's not one versus the other. And then I'm pretty sure you folks are talking about correlation, and I want to tilt it a bit, correlation and causation. So if you did have a bad code quality index of all these three things together, like cyclomatic complexity, code duplication, and coverage, can it inversely affect your stability index, which is also a team of 3 at this time because I've protected it from being gamed. And now you see the real, the shifts and the skews and the and the stuff that you care about. But it takes time to gather all these data. And the pipelines can actually do an awesome job of trending all of this, irrespective of whether you have an inbuilt dashboard or you're reaching out to whoever, Sumo Logic, Elkstash. It doesn't really matter for that purpose. But now you see a story, and every morning all you have to do is go and stand up in front of your dashboard, and you would know, like magically, what should be the priority for that sprint. And without too much effort, without pinging people, emailing people, calling 3-hour meetings, and doing war rooms, you will know from this one dashboard itself.
That's great. Having one centralized place collecting data, as you guys have talked about, I think that's wonderful. And having those indexes seems like a very smart idea to try and keep that people from gaming. Torsten, you've been quiet. What's going on?
Yeah, I'm always very quiet, as you know. No, I really enjoyed this, and what I can say from my own personal experience, real life experience, not so much analyst experience, is keeping each other honest, right? Having the pre-sales guys and the operations guys and the sales guys in the meetings where you discuss the gates. That is absolutely critical, no matter what the metrics are. I mean, before, you want to include them in building out the metrics, because the best quality doesn't help the sales guys if they don't get the coverage, the feature coverage they want. And then the ops guys also have their criteria when, the developers introduce crazy technologies that they didn't expect that they had to support, and then they get blamed for, ooh, this is now expensive or difficult to support. So I think that equilibrium, those checks and balances, from my perspective, is absolute key for all of this.
Nice. Excellent. All right. So let's move on to our next topic, which is, and I got to find my little thingy here. How do you, I can't get to it. How do you basically enable those analytics in the pipeline? Juni mentioned a couple of different tools that you can use to just collect data, but is there more to it than just plugging in a tool and collecting data? How do you make sure that that is happening in a good way? And I'm going to start this time with Torsten, because you deserve to be first, because I just said that you did. So there you go.
Excellent. Now I have to show off my lack of substance. What the key piece here is, in my personal experience, the loopholes, right? I've worked with teams, where one had team foundation server, the other one had different technologies, and you build your dashboard, you look at your dashboard, and you ask somebody, hey, why is the completion rate or the success rate of those builds so low? Oh, well, with that technology, you can't really fully automate this and that aspect, right? And everybody is telling you a story on why, with their own technology that has historically grown, you can't really compare to this team's technology, which is much more, organic. And basically all of those differences between how the teams do their processes, between the culture of the teams as well, where we talk about this DevOps culture. Oh yeah, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to talk about openly, our weaknesses. But if that's not in the culture, which it often is not, then everybody wants to guard themselves and wants to hide as much as they can. They want to not necessarily integrate their systems with the overall system, because then all the dirty laundry comes out. So to phrase that positively, I think no exceptions. No exceptions allowed, right? If the metrics go to the dashboard, there is no explanation needed from somebody on the phone when you yell at him and, hey, why is only 40% automation in your builds? Then that's a problem, right? You can't then say as a response, here's reason X, Y, Z why this was not feasible, right? Because then the dashboard means nothing if you find an excuse. And a way around every single thing. And then the automation backbone is really the third important thing. Usually we see a lot of fragmentation in automation. You see guys who love Chef and guys who love their PowerShell scripts and guys who, you know, they love all this the Microsoft guys, you know, they love their Team Foundation server and everything is great in there. This is often different universes in those different teams, and there's no automation backbone that unifies that, and then it's really difficult, and you end up in those PowerPoint discussions where everybody brings their PowerPoint to the gate a conversation and justifies why their thing is just perfect fine and should score 100, right? But the score is not worth anything if it's not automated and not everybody has agreed on in the beginning, and that's what I see as the biggest problem. Right.
And the agreement on the definition of those metrics.
Yeah, the exceptions, the automation, you have a dashboard. The numbers of the dashboard don't mean anything. They're not complete. People raise their hand and said, oh, yeah, but, you know, we have these and these things. And then the sales guy says, I don't care. I can't sell it if you don't give me that coverage. It can be the best.
If you don't ship it, it's great quality, but no one can ever see it. So
yeah, that's my summary. I mean, really, it's about no exceptions. It's about the cultural fit and balances everybody in the process.
Excellent. All right, great. Mirco, what are your thoughts on
I'll take it.
pipeline analytics?
I'll be a bit more technical. So for us, the challenge is twofold, right? So we tend to work with really large organizations that have very heterogeneous environments, and the second one is that we obviously work for many different organizations, so we're trying to then have even more heterogeneous environments for us. So for us, the key were twofold. One was to create an abstraction layer that we have in the middle that says, here's how a release should look like. Here are kind of the data points that a release should have, or a build, or a check-in, or whatever it is. And then no matter where we source it from, we fill in as much of that data model that we can. And the graphs and the metrics and so forth are driven from that meta model, so that you don't have to worry about, are you getting it from Jira, from TFS, from whatever. Right, so that's the first thing. The second thing is then obviously, and this is where the hard work comes in, that depending on which organization and which team you work with, you then need to do for that translation, right? So you need to have the kind of feeders from those underlying tools, and unfortunately, not all tools are willing to give their data up easily. Some of them hold them pretty tight. So you need to either dig through their data models underneath and figure out how you get to the database, or some actually provide APIs, thank God. Yeah. And sometimes you have to create little extra automation steps that write it out into a log file that you can read off, right? So I've done that many a times where where you have access to the data in the system, you then create a little script that starts writing it out into an XML file, and you read that into your data model. So that is kind of the setup that we use in architecture. And then the obvious thing to this is only automated metrics matter. Like anything that someone has to add into an Excel sheet, I would just say ignore. As that doesn't have any value, it's old, it can be gamed, just forget it. Like, no point. You rather admit that you don't have the data yet and find a way of automating it and spend the energy on that than looking at the rubbish data that someone gives you in an Excel sheet.
Yeah. I think if you have to feed the beast manually, all bets are off in terms of the reliability, the accuracy, all of those kinds of things.
All that stuff.
I mean, at least you're collecting something. I had a little bit of a discussion with Nicole Forsgren on this on a webinar we did, because I said, look, automate first, because otherwise you're going to have to manually collect all this data. She pushed back a lot on that, which I think is, which is legitimate. But I still feel a lot like when people are entering this stuff manually, it's just, it doesn't happen regularly. People hate to do it. And the volume of data that you get that way is sometimes, the law of small numbers kind of catches up with you.
Latency is problematic. Yeah. Consistency of how it's collected is problematic. Yeah. All of these things. Interpretation, people are horrible because they have bias, right? This is my...
And it's, I mean, I don't know how you guys are, but, I have to fill in timesheets, right? And when you fill in a timesheet after the fact, it's your bias of how much you felt this thing takes. not how much it took, right? You tend to forget the coffee you had and the 10 minutes you ended up browsing down into a rabbit hole of whatever news
Thank
you were
goodness
looking at.
nobody's going to see this,
Yeah.
Mirco. You know that you're gaming your timesheets. I'm glad this is not going to ever go anywhere.
Anders mentioned value stream mapping. It is sometimes, much to my dismay, the effort spent to draw that value stream map is greater than the value you get from the value stream map itself. So the drawing the value stream map is the non-value adding waste, which then leads you to discover your actual non-value adding waste. So it's been frustrating if you spend too much time on what symbol I should use, rather than, even if you have to stand up and just sketch something on the whiteboard and get the insights and then just run to your sprint planning meeting because you have action items, right? So that's and again, like the timesheet example, it's you have to understand to discover waste, you may have introduced more waste yourself.
Right.
That's the biggest overhead of those releases and how much they eat up if they're not automated. And if you need a ton of manual intervention on ops and dev and lots of meetings, then the ongoing release can have 30-40% overhead and absorb half the dev team, for example. And that's a huge problem.
Especially if you have multiple releases that are either dependent on one another or right following one another, because it's very unlikely that you're going to have just one release that you're worrying about. Look at
you often have only like 20% of the dev
programs across 4 divisions. That's a lot of trains moving around.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, interesting thing actually that Nicole brought up in that webinar too that I want to mention is she had this great phrase that I really liked, which is, we think a lot about what we do to our code. What we should worry more about is what happens to our code, right? Because part of what happens to our code is it sits in a corner untested, or it sits in a corner unintegrated, or all of those kinds of things. So it's almost like you want to put a little, like you put a camera on the polar bear's head and figure out, where they go and what they do. We should put a little camera on our code, so we know where it goes and what it does.
Trace
and we can figure out, how to.
I think it's.
Hey, what's that guy doing to my code? Yeah. Oh my God! Oh.
So one thing I'm always recommending is try to map your value stream into the pipeline, whatever tools you use. So I would just make the distinction, like you don't want to collect the metrics manually, but you want to map manual steps into your pipeline, because then you can get the metrics of how long it takes for someone to approve this, how long was I waiting for something to get done. So I don't see it, to be honest, I don't see it done very often, but that's what I recommend. And that goes with what Juni was saying, like if you do just a static value stream mapping once with everyone together, that's great to raise awareness, but it's costly, and you can't do that every week or every sprint. So if you get those results and map your pipeline to what's actually going on, so that it's the work is visible where the weights are, and then you can get bottlenecks.
Yeah,
but
most of the standard pipelines, like at least I know the few that are pipeline as code and pipeline as configuration. The pipeline as configuration, all the YAMLs and the JSONs that we just have to yank up to get a pipeline in like less than an hour. And it's a one-line change to say, in Bitbucket pipelines, at least it's a one-line thing to say, here's a manual step. And it calculates exactly what was the delay or the time loss. Even for Jenkins and pipeline.code, it's not a one-line, but it's probably more flexible for you to build that gate, a manual gate. And to have the value stream map is no longer the symbols or the sketch on the whiteboard. It's actually when you look at your pipeline visualization and you can just stream all the data. And someone mentioned like pipeline sees probably like hordes of data, but that's all transactional. So it's per transaction. In this context, transaction, I mean like a commit, right? You're committing code,
pipeline instance, a pipeline run.
Yeah. And it's a run, it's a transaction, you get the data, and then OLTP, this is online transactional processing, you stream it into some kind of a persistent store, whatever your preference is. And I probably do recommend starting off with RabbitMQ if you are like, if you really need a queue. If you're like doing this at the enterprise scale, maybe Kafka at some point in time, but at least RabbitMQ will get you started. You can probably ship I would say a minimum viable product with a kind of a RabbitMQ proof of concept. But once it's in your persistent store, it's like from OLTP, you've gone to OLAP, online analytical processing now. These were age-old concepts, right? Like we grew up with these concepts. But at that time, I didn't realize these would also apply so nicely to continuous delivery pipelines and DevOps and all the grand stuff. And then the Sumos and the Elk stashes are there at the other end. They collected the streams, and you left instrumentation in the logs, irrespective of whatever orchestrator you're using. You can leave those instrumentations, and Sumo is probably the best one that actually sniffs. Or even if you're using Splunk, it doesn't matter. Andy Man is probably thanking me at this time, like free advertisement. But it's kind of sniffing, logging, and displaying. And do recommend look at the trends instead of individual data points. Our individual data points are great. Trends is what you should be after, because there are some bad things that happen every day. We should step up and look beyond, like see the forest through the trees.
I totally agree. Paula, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think about, I had a project that reached like metric nirvana in my mind. But one of the things that was nice about it, so this is the one I'm talking about that had 28 programs, was after we had a baseline, the trend is really an important thing. And so I think, the metrics reveal the problem. It's on you to fix it, right? It's on you to figure out why. And don't discount looking both at the technical metrics as well as the flow. So we had a lot of teams where we were focused on flow, how, sort of that commit to, we started with when did you commit to doing the story, regardless of when you started coding, to when that thing made it in production. That was our full cycle time. And we were looking at why is it taking certain teams so long, and why are there certain behaviors of it's this team can do it in 6 days and this team takes 18, what the heck, what's going on? And as we would start digging into the technical, it might be, why is this taking so long? Well, our tests take 4 hours to run. Why do they take 4 hours to run? And then you start pulling that thread and you realize that, oh, there's this, whatever that issue is. Or we had an issue with one of the projects where, and this one sort of was funny to me, we were deploying to another group's data and copying the data took 4 hours. So even though we had release automation copying the data from point A to B, and we looked at it and we talked to them and we said, well, why don't you just copy the differences? And they were like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. They realized they didn't actually need to do that every time. But it was part of the pipeline to copy it. And so we were blindly following this path, even though it was clearly adding delay, it wasn't adding value.
The test data management thing, is that kind of where you're going with that?
Yeah, I mean, so just it's almost immaterial what the actual problem
what the data was, right?
The point is, once you've got a baseline,
you can lean it out.
You can start to tease out why certain steps are slow. Mm-hmm. And it's not because the data says blah, therefore the answer is whatever. The data says this is slow. So then you have to go talk to the engineer and say, why is this slow? What is it that we have to fix to make this not take, is it a political problem? Is it a process problem? Is it a technical problem? Is it, I don't have time to automate this. I don't have the skills to automate this. I can automate it, but this person that I rely on the other end refuses to use my automation. I mean, that happened once too. We automated it. And then the team that was in charge of putting it in production refused to use the automation. They did it all manually.
So airplane when you can walk seems to make a lot of sense.
The value of once you've really tuned that data, you start to get a sense, and the other thing you start to get is what's normal for that team. And so when it changes, it kind of gives you an alert. So one of the things I loved, I had my portfolio managers give me their cycle times of all their teams over time and how it compared to the last 6 months. And it was sort of like a control chart. And every time I saw somebody's cycle time go way up or way down, what happened? So way down is great. And usually it was, well, we implemented this improvement and oh my gosh, it was, life-changing. But when it went up, what's going on? What's going on with your project? And how come I don't know about an issue with this project? Because I just saw a number go off the charts and nobody came to me with my project turned red or whatever.
Right.
So it can be a leading indicator if you have a good baseline, then you can start to see what happened on the difference. So I think there's both the cycle time metrics that can give you something about how the team's performing in their work, but there's also some value in the really tech metrics of, time to test efficiency, cyclomatic complexity. All of those things can be really valuable in teasing out a core problem that you're trying to solve for.
Absolutely. Yeah. The comment that you made that Juni basically had called out earlier, I totally agree with that. Looking at an individual metric is not as relevant. And again, even if the data that you're collecting is inaccurate, if you look at it over time, the trend is not.
Right. The trend is not. Well, and I also remind folks this, are you collecting it to punish people or to give feedback?
Right.
Because when you collect it to punish people.
Oh, wait a minute.
We do that, right? We punish. I mean, that happens, right? You flog the team for the data instead of actually helping them and giving them feedback. So think through why you're doing it, because obviously I'm opinionated, but I don't have the. I don't think flogging team to success is a good idea.
No, the beatings will continue until morale improves. So that brings us to our final topic, which this has been a wonderful conversation, a lot of great interaction, but it's gone pretty long, so we got 10 minutes left. What do the different dashboards look like for different people? We've talked a little bit about it. We've talked about the need for sort of focusing on trending. I love the idea of that triangle to make sure that not one of those different parts of the metrics overweighs the other one. But what kinds of things do you show people based on their role or based on sort of where you are as an organization? Let's start this time with Juni, and we've got 10 minutes. So if we could keep it to 3 minutes, that would be awesome.
Fair enough. So the only thing, I think we've covered a lot here, so I won't take more than 2, hopefully. The one last thing that I would like to focus is on another crossover, like a hybrid of tech metrics and business metrics. So I've often had been in that magical moment where where the C-suite is asking me, show me the money. And however much I enjoyed Jerry Maguire, I've had my terrible feelings when it came to those meetings where. And
if you have the money, it feels great. But if you don't have the money, then you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, and I'm not the one with the credit card here. So tech metrics and anything like check-in to go live, feature lead time, it doesn't matter. But essentially what you're really doing at the end of the day for a tough C-suite is you're moving bits from point A to point B, which means nothing to them. So it's really engineering effort. Where is my cash, right? Show me the money. So I like to trend the business KPIs along with it. So if somebody is bothered about number of downloads of like a mobile game, let's say number of downloads per month, or new subscription, like number of new subscriptions per month, or number of enrollments, new customer acquisitions, or for that matter, lost customers, however you want it. Put it on the same canvas. You're not influencing their decision, but you're making this data available for everybody at the same time. Everybody can come in the morning and look at that same data. So you're not showing anybody anything. Right. They see it. They know what to do next. Very smart people. Just that this data set needs to be there with them.
Right. When we replaced the sugar with salt in our recipe, the sales went down. So what are we going to do now? Okay, Manuel, thoughts?
Hey, so I want to cheat, but just for 1 minute because of previous question. I just want to, because I have a little rant about
rant away. 3 minutes.
Like the popular tools that I see clients have adopted for their pipeline orchestration. Like also before, they have all the data, but it's often available to the users of the pipeline, and it's definitely often not turned into metrics that matter. And even though there is about, okay, what's the unit of work, what's the unit of planning time, and so on, but those are not difficult challenges. So I want to encourage tool vendors or the communities to look into this, but I also understand that's because there's a lack of demand from the customers to get that kind of automation and getting metrics out of the box, at least to get started.
Yeah,
and
so I'll
really
disagree with you. I don't
yeah.
think that there's a lack of demand for people to try and get that information, because we talk with lots of folks who are looking to try and do. Now, automation is good, but understanding the automation underneath the covers and what that's benefiting you is that's the sweet spot right now.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge of
there's obviously a lot of
go ahead.
There's a lot of different clients. So this is from my experience. We often end up doing as kind of so we have limited time for proof of concept and stuff. So we do something similar to what Juni was saying. Like we get the log aggregation from all the tools in the pipeline, so we can then get data out of that. But I think this should be more a tool provider rather than having to do this every time, or like Mirco was saying, that they seem to have a tool to do something like that, get that data and abstract from which tool.
Doing all the data loading and the ETL and finding all the sources of this stuff is that's a lot of work. I mean, one of the things we do in our own product and in the DevOps Insight part of Flow is collect all of this data, not just the stuff we see in the pipeline, but talking to Jira, talking to Git, talking to all of those things, so that we can start to correlate and then hopefully find some causation and help things better.
Exactly.
But you spend a lot of time just getting all these systems to talk to each other. That's a pain.
The centralized view, especially when you have not just one instance of Jenkins, but 50,000 of them across your organization. How do you make sure that you're collecting all that data? Thank you very much, Manuel. Mirco, go ahead, Manuel. Last minute, because we got
1 minute for the dashboards. I just want to say, for me, regardless of the dashboarding tool, the most important is to have a shared physical view of the core metrics, and that everyone gets to look at it and discuss. Because the business, I disagree slightly with what Juni was saying. I think they should understand what mean time to repair means. They should understand that our response is too slow, or what are the problems at the high level. And the same goes for developers and operations, understanding the business metrics, and having that visible dashboard sparks conversations and important discussions. And that's it.
All right, great. Thank you, Manuel. All right, Mirco, back to you.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it quick to get Paula and Torsten to chip in. I think the main thing for dashboards for me is that you shouldn't be afraid of duplication, right? So if you want to have different dimensions for the different either meetings, so I see that we have a certain dashboard for specific release meetings or project governance or whatever, and then have another view that is for project managers and release managers and build leads, then it's completely fine if you duplicate different views, the same data across those. And I think a good dashboarding tool that allows you to do that, I think, is the key to that, rather than relying on some heavyweight stuff. And then the last thing is try to support as many formats as possible. Like I remember that we ended up doing something in the early days that you then couldn't put up on a phone or something, and then on a release day, guess what? Most of the people are on the run somewhere and looking at the phone, right? They're on a conference call while they're doing shopping and they're checking out the phone. So if you can't look at it there, you're kind of screwed.
All right, absolutely. All right, Paula.
Yeah, I guess my one pitch is to the techies. Make sure you have at least one core mission metric. You got to know what that one thing that matters. I had a fraud portal. It was how many frauds we caught this month. It was, for a public facing website, it was how fast the transaction took a user. Our goal was under 3 minutes. So make sure that one most important business is up there for the engineers. Don't let them forget why they're doing what they're doing. And for the business, I think it's almost the reverse. Let the business see the health of the tech world, so that they're a stakeholder in how the teams are delivering value. I think if you let both worlds share, that's where you need to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. So that covers back on things that Mirco said, Manuel said, and Juni said. Just give them sort of that have the same metric across multiple dashboards. That's fine, because it's relevant to all those stakeholders, so that it can understand how the health of other parts of the system are impacting the overall business goals, and giving them the context around the business, I think, is super important too. Torsten, last but not least, my friend, what are your thoughts on this? You've got, we'll go long for you, so go ahead and take two.
I'm an analyst, so I don't have any quick thoughts. No, but the quick thought is related all to the business, right? Related all to the, I mean, the dashboards that I do myself and I have business responsibility, I relate the code, the features to actual deals, and the probability of those deals being damaged if they are not executed well. You know, those features are not there, then I have a risk, first of all, of losing this deal, or of losing this customer, of making that customer less happy. And that's, as an executive, what I want to see, but also as a developer, right? If I contribute even on the database level or on any level, I want to see which deal this is affecting, and how much money is involved, and how important this is. And as long as you make that transparent, for me, that's the absolute key.
Fantastic. All right. Well, you are a master of timing, because you finished exactly on time. Thank you, everybody. This is, I think, one of the most charged conversations we've had on C9D9.
Excellent.
A lot of great opinions, a lot of great information. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate everyone who's watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.